Welcome to Class Act Coaching, a podcast for teachers and instructional coaches. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe every one of you deserves a coach. Whether you're inspiring students or guiding teachers, let our school improvement team be your coach this week. Hello and welcome back. As always, I'm your host, Ashley Shaw, and here with me is my favorite coach, Daniel Rock, here to help me find our coach of the week. Hi, Daniel.
You know, you're my favorite teacher, Ashley.
Oh, thank you. I hope all your other teachers aren't listening to this right now.
I only said that because you called me your favorite coach.
I had to. I felt like I had to because, you're coming and helping me every week. So I felt like I needed to, suck up to you a little bit.
What is something that you are struggling with or that's just been on your mind as something you want to get better at?
Questions. I don't know about you in your classroom, but I end up asking my students a lot of questions and then I immediately answer them and move on. And I would like to get to a point in my life where I ask them some good questions and then let them answer them. So, do you have any advice for me about that?
Well, I would like to connect you with a gentleman named Jason Adair. He is a director for curriculum and instruction at SREB. He's been doing this work for well over a decade. He is one of our top people in terms of instruction and in terms of coaching teachers. He is able to explain and demonstrate things at a high level. And questioning just happens to be one of his specialties. I'm with you. I am in a classroom and I'll ask a question and I'll hear that silence and I'll kind of start to sweat a little bit and wonder, what do I do? And then just move on because that silence scares me. And I think that Jason can help us overcome that fear and let the kids do some of the heavy lifting.
That's good because I feel like a lot of our listeners out there are going to have the same issue. I don't think it's just the two of us. So I'm excited to be able to talk to Jason and let him solve my problems for me.
And after you talk to him, I'm going to come back on and we'll think about, as an instructional coach or instructional leader, what can we do to help our teachers make this pervasive and part of their work across the school?
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Let's talk to Jason now. Thank you for joining me, Jason.
I'm so excited to be here.
Before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about you and what led you to being here today?
Sure. So I started my career as a teacher. I taught high school and middle school math. And then I became an instructional coach at a middle school in Florida. And then eventually I moved to be a district specialist for math. And then I got recruited to come to SREB and coach. And now I'm the director of curriculum and instruction here.
Okay. So impressive, as have been all the coaches that have come to help me so far. It is the beginning of the school year, as I'm sure you are aware. And I find myself always at the beginning of the school year having a new set of students that I don't know. And they're all looking at me and I start asking them questions. And I think, oh, that's a really good question that's going to make them think. And then they just stare at me and stare at me and stare at me. And it feels like I'm about to be sunk down into a pit because it's just embarrassing because they're just all looking at me or they're like, what? Can you ask that again? So I asked Dan if he would find me a coach that could help me ask better questions to my classes. Can you help me with that?
I love the topic of questioning because I honestly think it's one of the most important things that teachers do. The art of teaching, questioning is really an art form. And as teachers, man, I'll tell you, my first few years of teaching, it was rough. And that's a good thing. That struggle that we go through is a good thing. So I'd love to chat with you about questions. The National Council for Teachers of Math has this document that they put out several years ago that has 8 effective teaching practices. And some of them are very math specific, but a few of them are general. And one of them that I can take into all different classrooms that I coach is the effective teaching practice is posing purposeful questions. As teachers, we want our questions to have a purpose. So I'm going to start by asking you this, and I think it's inherent in that statement, pose purposeful questions. What are some of the purposes of asking questions? When you ask a question, what are some of the purposes you have?
I want to make sure that they are following what I'm saying.
Great.
I also want to make sure that they are actually processing not just the facts I'm saying, but interpreting it and understanding it and being able to put it in their own words instead of just repeating my words. So those are big reasons that I like to ask questions.
I love that. So like assessing where they are, advancing their knowledge, seeing how can they take what they know and think a little deeper. Those are great purposes for questions. I'm going to be completely transparent though. So honestly, I think in my career, if you would have asked me what the purposes of questions are, I would have said something similar to what you said. But then if you would have actually scripted my questions or listened to my questions, there was dissonance between what I think and what I actually did as a teacher.
I'm sure that's true for me.
And so I think one of the most beneficial things you can do, and we'll talk about this throughout the conversation, is either have somebody in your life, your coach, it could be an assistant principal or principal, come in. It could be just using your cell phone as technology and hitting the record button, recording your questions, recording your lecture, and then scripting the questions you ask. And we're going to do something with that in a little, but it's one of the most beneficial things I had happen to me as a teacher. And it's where I figured out that there was a disconnect. Because when you looked at my questions, once that person scripted them for me, they showed that my purpose for asking questions was probably to either play the game, guess what's in my head, or what's the answer? Answer focused questions. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, because I definitely feel myself. I tell myself, this is the question that there is no right answer. Whatever they say is right. And then I'm immediately like, oh, that's not what I was looking for. What about this thing? And say my answer. So I definitely struggle with that.
And so one of the things I work with teachers on is this concept of funneling questions versus focusing questions. There's a few different categories that we can put questions in, but this is one of them. So funneling versus focusing. When we look at funneling questions are used to guide students towards a specific answer or understanding. Those are those guess what's in my head questions or the answer cut, what's the answer type questions. And they really, just like it says, funnel the students toward the answers. So it might be something like, what's the main character's name? What imagery is used in this stanza? In science, it might be something like, what happens to water after it evaporates? Those are funneling towards a specific answer. The opposite of that is a focusing question. And focusing questions are designed to encourage students to think more broadly about a topic or deeply about a topic. Those are those questions. When you asked what is the purpose of a question, those two answers you gave, those would have been focusing answers because you're asking them to think more deeply about something. So instead of asking, how does the process of evaporation affect the distribution of water in different parts of the environment? So you're asking them to think a little deeper than a kind of what is question. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Are there places for funneling questions?
Great question. What I kind of work with teachers on is teachers, we all fall into a cadence of questions. And there's this, it's either IRE or IRF, depending on the person who wrote it, but it's initiate, respond, evaluate, or initiate, respond, feedback. It goes something like this. Ashley, what's 11 plus 5?
16.
Good job. I initiated, you responded, and then I provided feedback. That cadence of questioning, that IRE or IRF cadence of questioning is dangerous. And the reason is almost always they're funneled questions. And so we get into, as a teacher, I get into this cadence of asking question, getting answer, asking question, getting answer. So what I like to say is when you ask a funneling question, there should be a follow-up that's focusing. One funneling question, and then I've got a couple, I call them arrows in my quiver that I'm ready to fire that are, okay, I assessed where you were, which is one of the things you said was a purpose of questioning, to assess. I've assessed, okay, you've got this knowledge. Now I've got to ask you deeper. So I want to go deeper into how might the process of evaporation affect distribution of water? Something where I'm asking them a deeper question.
Okay, I like that a lot.
So one of my favorite teachers I've ever worked with is in Pennsylvania, and I'm going to tell you, she was a world-class funneler. She funnel, and the kids just played the game and they asked. And I use this poem a lot as a teacher, and I honestly don't know what it's about. I think it's about love, but it's great. I use it with teachers a lot. It goes like this. It's real short, and I'm not quoting it for verbatim. Day 1, I walked down the street and I fell into a hole. Day 2, I walked down the street and I fell into a hole. Day 3, I walked down the street, I saw the hole, and I fell in. Day 4, I walked down the street, I went around the hole. Day 5, I walked down a different street. And I love that poem because as teachers, I think we're doing the best job we can. But it's one of the things when I see funneling questions. We were going through this cadence of coaching, and I'm in her classroom, and she's funneling. I literally carry a funnel with me, and I hold up a funnel when she funnels her questions. And she does this over and over again. She asks a funneling question, I hold up my funnel. She asks a funneling question, I hold up my funnel day after day. So eventually, and I'm telling her the poem. You walk down the street, you fell into the hole. You walk down the street, you fell into the hole. The moment she's working with the kids, I can see the question on her lips. And she looks at me. She's like, I see the hole and I'm going around. And she asked a better question. And it was so awesome to literally see the moment in her head where she had the funneling question loaded. She pulled it out of her quiver. She pulled the bow back and she was ready to release it, but she didn't. She stopped and she asked a really good question. And a couple months later, I was in her classroom. I was co-teaching with her and I asked the funneling question. And she runs and grabs my funnel and holds it up. She's like, you asked a funneling question. I'm like, man, the student has become the teacher. But we don't do it out of malicious intent. We do it for a reason, but it's something we have to really watch as teachers.
And I wonder, I don't know if this would work or not, but I feel like at least in high school age classes, I could probably talk to my students about the difference between a funneling question and a focusing question and tell them I want to be better. Like show them I need to learn too. I want to be better about asking you guys better questions. And I could, because I might not have somebody in my classroom holding up a funnel, but I could probably get a student to do it. Like,
Right.
hey, anytime I ask you a question that you don't think is deep or powerful or reflective, it's like a right answer or a wrong answer, and you feel, hold up the funnel, call me out on it.
I love it.
And get them to do that. That way, even though I don't have a coach in my classroom every day, I can still maybe use what you just said to work on my questions by using my students.
I love the fact that, anytime we can get students leaning in and thinking about that, like they're evaluating your questions, that'd be powerful. If you do that and that works, I want to know. I love that.
All right, I might try it. I'll follow up and tell you how it works.
Yeah. So one of the tips I have for you is, number 1, I really encourage you to use your device, record your questions, go ahead and write them out or type them out after you record on your cell phone, the lesson, and then play it back. And every time you ask a question, just write it down. Don't evaluate it at the moment, just write it down. And then after you've written down, the average teacher, they say, when you ask how many questions did you ask in this 30 minutes, they'll say 15. And it's really like over one every 30 seconds or so. We rapid fire question. So no matter what, write them all down, script it. And then after you've done that, go back and almost label them, focusing your funnel with where did this question fall? And then start to put that filter in your brain. I'm going to ask, and I love what you said, help teachers talk to your students about it. And then as you plan your questions, okay, I'm going to ask this assessing question or this kind of funneling question. I'm going to follow it up with these 2 questions, something like that.
Okay. That's a great tip. Thank you.
So something that really helps teach. So once I introduce teachers to the focusing and funneling, eventually I need more. And so that's where this thing called the Q chart comes in. I think we're able to post this, correct, Ashley?
Yes, I will put this in the show notes. You'll have a downloadable link so you can see a little guide to what we're talking about today, and it'll have an example of, I assume, of what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, it's called the Q chart or the question chart, and it's such a valuable tool to help you create questions. And I always think about with teaching, when I was a teacher, I always throw myself under the bus. I was doing the best job I knew how, but I would say a majority of the questions I asked in the classroom were off the cuff. I hadn't planned them. I didn't plan my questions very often. Now, whenever I'm teaching a lesson, or if I'm coaching a teacher in the planning process, we always strategically plan our questions. And the reason is, I think it's when I'm asking off the cuff questions, a lot of times they're those low order funneling questions.
Makes sense.
Because I don't have time to think. Honestly, I should say this is one of my tells for if I ask a good question, focusing question versus funneling question. If I ask a student a question and I either get their eyes to go up in the air or their head to tilt a little, or sometimes both, I know I asked a good question because I made them think. If they immediately pick up their pencil and start writing, I funneled, right? Like I gave them so much information that they didn't have to think at all. They could just immediately start writing their answer. So now with this cue chart, it's basically a grid. And so it has two axes. On one of the axes is the questions who, what, where, when, why, how. And on the other axis is, did, can, might, should. So when you put those together, the questions are like, what is, who did, how might. And so they're the first two words that you ask when you ask a question. And can you picture it? Tell me the difference in your mind, just as I've said this, of what's the difference between a what is question and a how might question?
What is will be a funneling question. It's going to have a definition or something to it.
Yeah.
And what was the other one? How
might or how does
might,
or how could.
How that is at least not going to be a yes or no or a simple answer. It probably is going to be more detailed, more focused, more thought-provoking, and opinion-based.
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly right. And what happens as teachers is I almost have this cue chart in my head as, first of all, as I'm planning questions, but also in the moment. Like we do ask in the moment questions and they tend to be low order. But when this is in your head, you move towards those how might questions more than you might without this cue chart in your head. And the goal of it is to encourage higher order thinking. And so by moving from kind of the what is factual questions to the more complex questions, we as teachers can scaffold so that, we start out with a question that's answerable by all students and gets their brain kind of engaged, but then eventually moves them deeper. So it could be something like this. When did this event happen? Right? So history. When did the Civil War start?
Right.
Then as we move in this cue chart, that's a good starting question. But then why might this event have occurred and what could have been done differently? So now I love what you said. Is there time for a funneling question? Sure. Gets them engaged, gets them moving, gets their brain. It's like primes the pump. But then eventually I got to get them to think deeper, more deeply. And that's what this
Right.
cue chart helps me as a teacher to do is I'm going to ask this lower quadrant question, this what is or how did, not how is too high, but who is. But I'm going to follow it up with a deeper question that causes them to evaluate or synthesize or make a prediction or something like that.
And I like that this helps you plan your questions ahead, because that, just like you said, it's something I struggle with too, who needs to plan a question? No, and you think of a question, but you don't think of good questions in the moment. At least for me, when I try to plan them in the moment, I try to come up with this deep question I just thought of right then. I don't know how to word it.
I'm filled with analogies. I love teaching kids and I love using what I've learned over my 20 years. I've been a coach now for 20 years. And over my 20 years of coaching, I've become a better teacher. And I constantly am evaluating myself as a teacher. And did I focus? Did I funnel? Did I get the head tilt? And one of the things that's in my head a lot, I always said, did I get a head tilt or did they immediately pick up their paper? I always have this image of a GPS's job, its purpose is to funnel you to the spot that you want to go to. Right?
Right. I don't want them making me deep think about the directions.
Right.
I want it to tell me exactly what I need to do.
Very good at it. Turn left here, turn right here. without a GPS, I can't imagine life. I know I lived life without a GPS. I just can't imagine how awful it was. In the classroom, we don't want to do that though. Our job is to promote thinking, problem. A GPS does not allow me to be creative. It allows me to turn left here. I always think of, I want to be a roadmap. I want to provide the map for the students. And this cue chart is one of those tools that I've used to encourage higher order thinking. And then the other tool, and I love what you said earlier about getting your students involved in this. One of my favorite things that happened was in Orlando. I was working with a group of teachers, did the cue chart. We did some stuff about questioning, showed them the cue chart. I come back a month later and go into this teacher's room, and the cue chart is literally her bulletin board in the back of the room. I'm like, tell me about that, Rachel. And I just loved it so much. I thought it could make my students better questioners too. So she introduced her students to the cue chart and found them quickly turning around and they were using it to formulate their own questions. And so she saw an uptick in their questions just because of the cue chart.
I am really glad you told me that story because that is definitely a struggle.
Yeah, we want our students to be deep thinkers and problem solvers. The cue chart allows me to analyze. Like I said earlier, there was a disconnect between my beliefs and my actions when I was a teacher. This is another tool that allows me to analyze my questions. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great tip, and I am excited to try using the cue chart, at least for myself, if not giving it to my students and telling them to use it when they ask me questions.
Yeah, so that's my second tip is to utilize this cue chart to plan your questions. And then the other side of it is, you know how you scripted your questions and you funneled or focused? The other thing you can do is take those questions and almost put a tally mark in each section of the cue chart where you asked a question. And you'll get to see a picture of where your questions fall right now, and then strive to, a month from now, record your questions again and see if you're moving and having a better scattering, or if all of your questions are centered in one of the quadrants, only one of the quadrants. So this is a super useful tool.
All right, well, I'm excited to try it. Do you have any more tips for me?
Yeah, one more, and this is I think you alluded to it almost at the beginning, and I really like what you said. But wait time. Tell me, just tell me, yeah, tell me briefly what are your thoughts about wait time, and what's hard about it? Why is that a thing in our world of teaching?
So I know when I was in school, when I was getting my master's and I had to take a pedagogy class, they made it sound very easy. They're like, oh, ask a question and then you wait 30 seconds, let's say. Even if you just count it in your head to 30 and then just let them have time to think about it and answer it. That's all you have to do. It's so easy. And then you get in front of the class and 30 seconds feels like 30 years. And they're all looking at you and you're like, oh, nobody's ever going to figure this out. This was a really bad question. I just have to answer it myself and move on because otherwise it's going to get really embarrassing.
Or a student who you can count on for the answer.
Right. Please, somebody save me. Anybody. I don't care who.
Right.
So I don't know what it is about being in a classroom, but time slows down when there's silence.
Yeah.
And asking that question and not getting immediate feedback is like it feels like you're being judged.
I love how you said the problem. I love when I'm coaching a teacher and a teacher says the magic words in my brain. I almost always have my timer out just so I can use it periodically as a coach. When the teacher says, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about this, and then I'm going to call on somebody, right? As a tool I use as a teacher a lot, I immediately hit my stopwatch. I've done this probably 200, 300 times in my life. On average, how long do you think it takes before the teacher starts talking? They say, I'm going to give you 30 seconds of think time.
I would guess if you came in my class, it would be about 10 seconds at the most.
So I'd give you a high five because that would be high. Usually it's about 3 before.
Oh, okay.
Literally, they're like, okay, what do you think? You know, because the first kid who's that rapid responder, that high flyer, hand goes up in the air. And so I love, you said it, count to 30. And so I want to put some things in your brain as why we use wait time and what are some purposes. So number one, I love this idea of think time. That's the term I use a lot of times. And you have to establish a routine centered around think time. And that routine needs to be something like think time looks like, and you've got hands down, brains engaged, right? Think time does not look like hand in the air, because the second hand goes in the air, what are the implications? I'll ask you, what are the implications to everyone in the room when a hand goes in the air?
Somebody figured the answer out and they haven't yet.
And my brain can disengage because there's somebody smarter than me and they need to talk. They're going to talk. And so I don't have to engage in this. And so I really want think time. The first thing is you have to establish a routine with your kids and practice it with them. I don't care if, like, high schoolers, we got to practice. Think time looks like hands on desk, in lap, not in the air. The second hand goes in the air, you're like, remember, think time looks like, and they put their hand down, no hands in the air, because there's nothing more damaging to think time than hand in the air. It increases the pressure on the other kids, and their brains aren't able to think.
And one thing I like about that is, so if I give them an in-class assignment, let's say, write for 10 minutes, it never feels that long because they know it's going to be 10 minutes. They know. But when I ask a question and I know in my head it's going to be 30 seconds and they don't know and they're staring at me, that's when time feels infinite. I like the idea of telling them, like you said, 30 seconds to think about this answer. And then we all know it's going to be 30 seconds and it feels like 30 seconds, not
right.
hours.
And I'm going to wait you out because what we have to always think about is with our kids is processing time. Some kids have really fast processors in their head. They are working on the NVIDIA chip, right? They are fast. They're good.
Right.
And some of our kids have slow processors. Our English language learners are literally taking the words you said, translating it into the language that's in their head, answering it with the language that's in their head, translating it back into English, and then feeding it back to us. That requires time. And so that is why we have to give more wait time, be better at giving wait time. It adds for a more inclusive and confident classroom because the students know they're not going to be rushed.
I like that a lot.
If you think about it, it's a culture building moment in our classroom that I'm not going to rush especially when I ask a focusing question, one of those questions on the cue chart that requires more than just a 1 or 2 word answer, that requires some time. I have to give them time to think about it, process it, maybe turn and talk with a partner, and then I give them that time. But that wait time is crucial if we're going to build powerful thinkers in the classroom.
Right. And I mean, that makes sense that you rationalize, oh, I'm going to ask a question to get them thinking, and then feels forever. So you don't give them the time to think, but you can't answer a thinking question if you don't have that thinking time. So,
right. And I'm literally in my head be like if it's 30 seconds in my head, I'm literally counting. Or if I'm knelt down next to an individual student, it's not a whole class thing, but I ask a question to a student, I'm literally saying in my head, I'm not going to talk until you talk. I'm not going to talk until you talk. I'm not going to talk. Every once in a while, I'll look up at the student and I'll be like, I'll wait you out. Because here's what I do know is a student's wait time is longer than yours. They will wait you out. And so you have got to have some resolve, because I agree with you. It's uncomfortable when it's when it's silent in the class. It's uncomfortable. The cool thing is it's uncomfortable for them too. And so you got to wait them out.
All right. Well, I will do my best.
Yeah. And one of my favorite stories on wait time is I was with a teacher. Her wait time was I remember in a room, I did the timer thing, and she asked a question, and within I think it was 2 seconds, less than 3 seconds, 2 point some seconds, she asked a question, told him that she's going to give 30 seconds of wait time, and then called on a student to answer the question, all within 2 seconds. And so I talked to her about it, and I was like, how long do you think it was? And she's like, oh, probably 20 seconds. I'm like, it was 2. And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah, wait time is hard. And so she thought about it, and then I came back. So I go into classroom, then I don't come back for another month. I come back up for another in a month or 2. And all over her room are the signs that say wait. WAIT. W all over the room. I'm like, tell me about those signs. She's like, well, it stands for why am I talking? And
Oh,
he's like, it's my visual cue to myself that I need to stop talking. And I was like, ooh, what a powerful tool. I've shared that story in classrooms across the United States, and I see it in different classrooms. The teachers are like, we want to wait. This is the thing is we don't do anything out of malicious intent for the most part. We do it because a lot of times because of time, we feel pressed as time. I've got 45 minutes. I've got this much curriculum. And I want to say time is the enemy of thinking. And right, like,
yes. I've definitely been guilty of that where I know I have probably an hour and a half of stuff I want to cover in my 60-minute class.
right.
And I'm like, I don't have time. I know I need to ask questions, but I don't have time because I got to get through this whole thing. And so I just talk for an hour and 15 minutes.
So you plan that, and even you might plan this really good question, right? So you use the cue chart, you plan this really good question. And this is why the planning is so important, because if you plan the question, you ask the question, and you don't give significant wait time, and you just get a rapid response, what are the results?
Not deep thinking, that's for sure.
If we think about classroom culture, I start to close my classroom down to those who need longer processing time. And so I don't want that. So I'd rather you plan 3 really good questions that you're going to ask and give the wait time than have a bunch of, like, the cue chart is not designed to have you do that rapid fire IRE questions that we talked about before. It's designed to have you ask questions that are deep and require this wait time. That's why I hope there's a connection between these 3 tips, between ask more focusing questions and less funneling questions, use the cue chart to plan your questions, use wait time in your classroom, set up a routine where hands up are not expected during think time. All of those things allow our classrooms to become places where thinking happens.
All right. Well, thank you very much. The bell you just heard means we're almost out of time. But before you go, as always, I need some homework to do.
So my assignment centers around, I'd love for you to, number 1, script your questions. Like we talked about, I use a recording device, record your lecture, and then write down every question that you ask and label them as focusing or funneling. Then plan on your next lesson that you plan some higher order questions utilizing the cue chart that I provided. And then let's see if your students don't just stare at you, but they actually engage more in the thinking process.
All right. Well, I will try this and I will post my results on social media. And hopefully, everybody listening that wants to participate will post some questions that they came up with for us too. So, Jason, thank you so much for being here and for doing this with me. It was really useful information.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I wish you a great teaching year.
Thank you.
Well, Ashley, that was extremely helpful. Tell me some things you heard that you definitely want to try in your classroom.
Well, I'm definitely going to be doing the wait time. I'm at least going to try to be a lot better about actually giving some wait time for my students. And I want to focus more on asking those focusing questions because I'm sure that I'm sure when I do my homework for the week and I monitor my questions, I'm going to find out that I do a lot of funneling.
Definitely. We all do. Every teacher does. I think he said it's kind of just the natural way to do it. I want to look at what he said from the perspective of somebody trying to coach a group of teachers, right? I want to help my teachers do the things that he described. And one thing that he showed, he's an amazing coach. And he talked about the funnel and holding up the funnel every time she asked a funneling question. And that is such a fun, cool way to easily communicate with your teachers. I honestly can hear some people wondering, well, I wonder if that could be a little threatening or people might be distracted. He built a relationship with those teachers. If you have a relationship of trust with your teacher, you can do something like that. And you just have to be fun, which brings me to another point, which is modeling these types of things. He talked about, you heard him talk as much about him doing this in the class as the teacher doing it. And, one of the strategies he said was coaching using data collection of how often they ask a certain question, or videotaping and looking at it. And what I recommend to any coach is do it yourself first. And I know he does that. Videotape yourself or teach a lesson and say, I want you to mark down how many times I do a funnel or how many times I do a focus, or hold up the funnel every time. So make sure that the pressure is on you and they see you doing it. They give you feedback, and then it's reciprocal when you turn it around and then you give it to them.
And I think that goes to your first point too, because I think that when you start saying, hey, these things I'm asking you to do, I will do them too. That's how you build that trust, that builds a relationship so you can hold the funnel up in the class.
Exactly. And we're just creating a culture of learning. I'm the coach, but I'm also a learner, and I'm trying to get better. And, we're going to get better together. Jim Knight calls it reciprocity. And it's a critical component of being a great coach, which we heard, from the examples that he gave. Jason certainly is.
Yes, I agree with that.
All right. So thank you.
I'm excited to see who you're going to pick next week, and I'm looking forward to talking to you then. Thank you for listening to this episode of Class Act Coaching, brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit SREB.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement, and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.